And he may be recognizing that in some way we have to be tough at the moment, but we'll have to not try to beat them, but join them. And maybe there will be a world movement back to a gold back currency or some way. Well, we kind of knew that for those that paid attention when the BIS made gold a tier one investment. That really opened the door for these central banks. And if you think about it, since that time, they became major, not only buyers of gold, but they've been divesting themselves of U.S. treasuries. They have sought other alternatives for their reserves. It also plays a role in the BRICs. And whether the BRICs stay a small offshoot group that works among themselves or grows much larger, as some of us, like myself, believe it eventually will, they will have to use something other than a fiat currency in order to show that they're trustworthy and be able to deal with. They've kicked around a couple ideas that will include about 40% in gold and using the other currencies of the countries. But nevertheless, what I think we need to come back to, and I know Bitcoin has stolen the financial media's attention and gold was pushed back to being a relic, but this is what gold has done for a couple thousand years. It's doing the things that a lot of people, including Kiko, have said for years. It's a store of value and a protection of wealth. And that's what it's doing. And now it's being done at a time when people are scurrying to get as much as they can of it, recognizing how useful it really is. Trump is a shrewd businessman, whether you like him or not. And there's days I like him and there's days I can't stand him. But he's a shrewd businessman. And he may be recognizing that in some way we have to be tough at the moment, but we'll have to not try to beat them, but join them. And maybe there will be a world movement back to a gold back currency or some way. But one thing it's demonstrated again and again and again, it's worked for a few thousand years. And that's why people are going to choose something like that versus something that's only been around a dozen or a couple dozen years, is too volatile and too, swings too much and doesn't have the representation that gold has. And that's what I think is transpiring now. The people with real big money, they recognize that gold is going to be their way out and not something else. Well, we'll find out a few months from now, Jeremy. The BRICS will meet again in the fall. Right now, they still having more members join. Yes, Trump had said a few things. He said a lot of things about tariffs and taking over countries and all, which I think he's really out of place to do that. But a lot of his art of dealing, that's what he does. He blusters. He sets up a worst case scenario. So that way, when you do settle lower, you feel like you got something. And he was glad to get that little part to begin with and all. But I do think gold is showing what we've all said, and it's paid to own it. Lost in all of this, Jeremy, in this millennium, which is now 25 years old, since the millennium began, gold has outperformed stocks and bonds. Yeah. Yet if you went into the typical financial service firm anywhere in the U.S., you wouldn't find gold in more than 1% of the people's holdings. Yet the things that they own the most, gold has outperformed both of them. I think a lot of people will act when there's a fear of missing out. I think when it becomes clearer what will be transpiring with this gold and why it's been moved here, even if the price is higher, people will be more comfortable about buying it because it will become more of a general talking point. Most people are followers. Most people don't lead. And I think that's what it will need. But understand this, and this is a very good point. When I entered the business 40 years ago, and 40 years ago, the stock market was viewed as one of the last places you should invest. For 27 years, it was stuck between 700 and 1,000, Jeremy. And a guy named Robert Prechter Jr., who no one knew at the time, came out and predicted that the Dow was going to go to 3,700. And people were scratching their heads in the early 80s. 3,700. It's never been over 1,000. No one could imagine it could go to 3,700, yet to 40-something thousand 40 years later. The same is about the gold price right now. Most people can't imagine, it really can't go much past 3,000. It used to sell just 800. We have no idea what that could be about because there's not as much of it as much as what people could want of it.
Hmm.
Look what the buy-in has done so far to it. So I wouldn't put any top number on it. Yeah, you could pick numbers for short term, and 3,000's a round number. But remember, this is all new all-time highs. There's no real significance because we've never been here before. But don't think it just can't go higher because just things can't, because that's what people thought about the stock market for a few decades. And yet it went up, 30, 40 times the level that it traded for a lot of years.
Yeah.
I think this is really powerful. I think it's two different forces, both going for two different reasons to own the same thing. And that's why that price still has some substantial upside over the rest of the year. A lot of things could impact that. A big hiccup would suddenly be if Trump can't have the free leg that he's basically having now to do these things and all. But I
Hmm.
also think, like I said, I think we're going to see that the BRICs are real. They weren't damaged, and their combination and those part of the world buying gold. Asia, with reports of people in stores in China on weekends are shopping for gold like you'd be shopping for food. So I just think there's still a lot of good things happening, and we don't have neither the general public in or the so-called mainstream financial service industry behind it. It's when those people are talking about it on a regular basis, that'd be a good time for you and I to talk again about maybe it's time to take our profits. Well, they're printing money. That's the way I can describe some of the gold producers. And for their future growth, they're going to use their currency, their stock.
Hmm.
I think we're going to see a dramatic increase in M&A, not only among themselves, but as they go down the food chain to an industry which is still hurting, still struggling to get into a bull market. It's not there yet, the junior resource market. But I think once that starts, and one of the ways I think it's going to start is when a couple of these fairly big companies merge. I'm speculating just an IM Gold Agno Eagle type of
Right.
merger. I think that's going to open the door, and suddenly people are going to look and see these juniors that is, a lot of juniors right now, their gold in the ground is still being valued only between $10 and $40, and gold's hitting 3,000. Once that turns and the people look at it in a meaningful way, then there's going to be a rip roaring bull market. I don't think we're too far away from that. But if you asked me that 2 years ago, I would have told you that same thing. So I have to point that with caution. Well, they're going to the free cash flow is going to create their values of their stock. I mean,
Right.
look at IM Gold just as an example. 18, 24 months ago, people were counting 8, 9, and thought 10 they were out. Now they've made a dramatic turnaround. One of their key mines have turned around, and now their stock has gone up 3 or 4 times from that. Those type of moves at a time when they've paid down a lot of their debt, not just them, but a lot of others, and have so much free cash flow, they're going to look around, and quite frankly, it's a shopping list for them. There's so many smaller, mid-sized companies as well as juniors whose valuations are so incredibly low. It's just going to be too hard to pass, and that's when we're going to see them step up. And once it starts, it'll roll real fast. It's not something that's going to gradual. It's just like a log jam. When they pull that one log out, then the rest of it's going to flow with it. If I had my wish, there's a lot of these juniors that are lifestyle companies. They're really just a way to live for the people running it and all. I've
Absolutely.
heard it said, and I don't disagree with it. If hundreds of these little juniors disappear, to be better for all the rest of us. But it's still such a small market cap that any real money that flows into this is just going to drive that whole market dramatically higher. And it has every other ingredient it needed now. Everything but the juniors have moved. And now with the next few quarters, think about this, Jeremy. You're going to see very little earnings increase on General Wall Street. One of the areas people are going to see suddenly is, wow, these gold mining companies, look how much better their earnings are. That'll flow money in that normally doesn't play that market, and that's what will kick it off, in my opinion.